So, hello everybody. This is the monthly Plant 3D user community virtual meetup. My name is Martin Bus. I'm a designated sports specialist at Autodesk since 5 years. I'm together here with Nabil. Nabil, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see myself also.
All right. So the line is muted until after the presentation. That's where we open the line where you can ask questions. You could also type your question into the questions box during the call. So let's see if this works. Nabil, can you please type something?
Yeah.
Just as a test. So yeah, Nabil will try to answer the questions during the call, or we have a discussion after the presentation. Or if you cannot answer the questions, we can take them.
You can go ahead and we'll test it in parallel. Yeah, no worries.
All right. So the webinar is recorded, and the recording will be available at the customersuccess.autodesk.com page in the webinars sub area. Again, Nabil, maybe you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, quickly. So I am a technical specialist working on the AEC space, and I work with Autodesk since 8 years, and I have a background on the piping industry, mainly as a superintendent working in Europe. And I am based in the Middle East since 5 years in Dubai.
All right, thank you very much. So my name is Martin Bus. I'm from the Munich office. I'm since 5 years at Autodesk supporting Plant 3D and BIM 360. So the agenda of today is starting with an overview and some little news about Plant 3D. The theme of this month will be maintaining associations between catalog specs and the Plant 3D model, which will allow you a powerful workflows for managing the changes. Of course, in best case, you don't have any changes, but that's not realistic. So follow-up questions from the last month, we don't really have them. We did answer them in the call. And again, there will be on the page where you find the recording, there will be also a document with those questions that couldn't be answered during the call.
Yeah, and Martin, I cannot post a question apparently. Somehow, maybe if the participants can test. Otherwise, just feel free to raise your hand, or we will unmute yourself, and then you can speak, especially at the end. No worries about that.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know. Well, I think I can write a question, but this doesn't. No, I can't. Can I? No, I also cannot do it. Let's see. Give control to. No. All right. Yeah. Let's continue here. This call is to understand. The objective of this call is to understand how spec items are linked to their source catalog, and to understand how the Plant 3D model components are linked to their spec items. So there's a flow from the catalog to the spec and then into the 3D. Understand workflows for updating piping specs while maintaining relationship with catalogs and the 3D model. So safe harbor statement, it can always happen, and I think it will happen that I'm talking about some future developments about Plant 3D, and as always, in the worst case, they don't get real, but in most of the cases, they will, I would say 99% of the cases when we talk about future developments that coming with the next release, they will really come. But it could also be if that for some unlucky reason things have to be pulled back. So this is just to make you aware of this. And here we are already at something that's already in a public beta, Plant 3D with BIM 360 Docs, the collaboration solution, because this is the only system that we will offer that does really make collaboration between different geos possible. You know, there are other solutions like the Vault solution, for example, which does work on if the offices are nearby, but the Plant 3D cloud collaboration is really designed for working across geos, so worldwide projects. So in 8 days it will close this beta, so you still have chance to test it. You just need to go to this AutoCAD Customer Console webpage. It's linked here in the handout. You will get access and to the download of the beta software. You install it on a not on your productive machine, on a different machine, because it's a beta, just in case. And then you write an email to this email address that you see on the slide. Then you get access. You also need at least a trial BIM Docs project which is the hub, the cloud hub, as a basis for your collaboration project.
Yeah.
But okay,
Martin,
8 days. Yes.
Yeah, just adding something. If you know the closing is in 1 week, and if people don't cannot test it, and they want to learn more about collaboration and stuff, I just wanted Martin to remind that 2 months ago we delivered the same webinar with the topic on working with distributed teams. So we do like a deep analysis of all the collaboration possibilities, including that one. So I recommend to the audience to go back to this webinar 2 months ago and download the presentation and the recording.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning this. Also, I want to mention that the release of Plant 3D 2021 is quite close. It could be, should happen within 1 month, which is not guaranteed. There's one question coming in, Nabil. Maybe you can have a look at that.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Exactly. So there we had a presentation around the collaboration topic. If you want to have more details, just find the recording of the session on the customer success board. All right, let's start with the topic. So what data is used to keep the connections? So we are getting here a bit analytical. Finally, in your daily work, it's not relevant, but it's good to know how it works. So what causes the disconnects will be the question, and how to avoid these issues, of course. And then also how the plant spec update check works. So the connections between the 3D models, the specs, and the catalogs are created and maintained with unique IDs. So each part in a model and spec and catalog has a unique ID. And so the IDs in this case we are talking about is the GUID, which is meant as a worldwide unique ID. Yeah, I was checking the background in so I think GUIDs, they can be created in different versions. Now, just as a side note, in version 1, the GUID was created by the MAC address and the timestamp, but because kind of user got trackable, they changed it. So now we have already format 4, which I don't know anymore how it is created, but the way it is created, it should give you a really worldwide unique ID. So that's the idea of the GUID. But I will not go into more detail here. So we have IDs on the parts in the catalog. We have IDs on the parts in the spec and in the 3D. And with these IDs, the parts are connected. They are usually hidden from the user because you don't need to know them anyway. Nobody can memorize them. They're a bit long. So, but if you have a look here, you can see if we have a look at this slide, you can see how it looks like when you open the catalog and the specs, which are both SQLite databases, by the way. So the PCAT file, the catalog, is a SQLite database. Also, the PSPC file of the pair of spec files is a PSPC file, which means it can be opened by SQLite editor. And here you find the size record ID in the catalog and in the spec, and this is really the connection between the catalog part and the spec part. So updating specs from the catalog, as you know, is you push the button check for updates from the catalog. You can also do it with right click into the spec, but be careful. Some users assume that when you right click on a family and say check for updates from catalog, that it will do it on that family only, which is not the case. It will update the whole spec. So it doesn't matter if you do it from the main menu, like you see on the left side of the slide here, or if you do it by right clicking into the spec on a particular family, it will always update the whole spec from the catalog. It will check for updates in the catalog. So then you will get this on the right side, this window which gives you the option to update or not to update. Not to update because there are some details you can review, and if you see, oh, there's something and I'm not sure what it is, and maybe somebody changed something, but I don't want to update, you still can decide not to update in this situation. So the settings, what properties are compared and synchronized, are located in the Plan 3D Spec Editor pull-down menu. So this is a place where usually nobody looks at, but it's interesting because you can control here how the parts are checked and what parts will be considered, or what properties will be considered for comparing and deciding on if an update is necessary or not. But you will see this later on the screen, what configuration window I'm talking here about. So what data is used to keep the connections? New IDs are generated for components when? In the catalog. When a new part is created in the catalog, you will get new IDs because otherwise you would conflict with existing parts. So if you create a new family in the catalog, you will get new IDs. If you, of course, delete a family from the catalog, you will also delete the IDs if the IDs are already sent. So if the parts are already sent to a spec, you will lose the connection. It's very clear. So a new part is created in the catalog either manually or by importing or by doing a copy or by importing from Excel with the catalog builder. So in this case, no connection yet is built, but the IDs are created. So if there are existing connections to the spec, they will be lost. if you delete a family from the catalog. So in the spec, new IDs are generated when a new part is added to the spec from the catalog, and this is important because it also means if you delete a family from the spec, then you will lose the connection to the catalog. You cannot update the parts from the catalog anymore. And even more, sorry, that was a bit misleading. So if you delete a part from the spec, what you the main problem is you lose connectivity to the 3D parts, which comes in the next point. Of course, you will also, if the part is deleted, there's no connection to the catalog anymore. If you create a new spec, it will, of course, have a new connection to the catalog family. As you see here on the right side, a connection between the spec part and the source catalog is built in that moment when a new part is added to the spec from the catalog. Of course, if you add a new part, if you add a new family, there will be a new connection to the catalog. But in the 3D model, when a part is placed in the model from the spec palette or spec viewer, no matter how you do it, there will be the ID created in that part, and that ID comes from the spec. So a connection between the model part and the source spec part is created. So the main problem is if you delete a family from the spec, then you cannot update the 3D parts anymore. So you should really avoid during a project to delete families from the spec. And I know that sometimes you get the impression that, or you have problems to update a spec from the catalog. Before you decide to delete this family, please try differently. For example, you want to update a spec family from the catalog, but it's just not happening. You change something in the catalog, but it's not updating in the spec. Try to change some other properties in that part. If this doesn't work, maybe add a new family into the spec so it will update is triggered. Just try to avoid to delete it. That's really key for the update of the 3D model from the spec. So what is causing now disconnects? When does the Plant 3D model disconnect with the spec, or when does the spec disconnect with the catalog? I already mentioned some situations. So renaming or removing specs will you will lose connection to the 3D model then from the spec. Change project spec path. Deleting part families from the spec. Removing parts from spec families and re-adding them. So this is important because there is, if you go into the spec editor and really double click onto families on your spec in the spec editor, you can remove parts from the spec. You just check here this check mark and then it will be gone from the spec, and later on you can re-add it. But if you re-add it, it would have a new ID, because what actually happens in the background is that the part gets removed from the spec, and this is what you can read here. It's just the assumption usually is that you just disable it, you hide it, and then you enable it again, and it's the same part, but it's not. It's really a new part that gets created from the catalog here. So specs and the connectivity between specs and catalogs, of course, gets broken when you rename or you move catalogs or delete parts from catalogs, part families, parts. So how to avoid this? Good procedures are key. Communication to your team. Workflow example. The admin modifies the catalog, saves it and updates the spec from the catalog. Saves it, notifies the user of a spec change. The user updates the model from the spec. So first he copies the updated spec into the project, assuming that they are not working on the live specs, the admins. Now with the data manager, you can verify all model parts updated and review the graphical changes as well. So that would be a good procedure. We will have a bit of an idea how this works with the data manager in 2 slides ahead. So another thing is that if you have established a spec building procedure that uses property overrides in the spec editor to add material code or schedule, and I think also this family long description builder is meant here. So you want to make sure to deselect those properties from the update. When from updating the specs when from the catalog settings. So it means if you yeah, so if you, for example, send a spec to somebody and you have this activated, those yeah, let's just take it as written here. So if you have established a spec building procedure that uses the property overrides in the spec editor to add material code or schedule into your catalog items as they are inserted into the spec, you will want to be sure to deselect those properties from the update. All right, yeah. So this makes sense. So in the and we will see this in one slide or two. In the configuration. So this is a special feature, this property override that you can use to override the material code or schedule when you're updating, or when you're placing families into the spec. So once they are added into the spec, you should deselect those properties from the spec update, because otherwise, with the spec update, those properties again will be overwritten by the original properties from the catalog. So it means if you're using this feature, property override, you should also configure in the properties selection for those properties that will be checked for update and will be updated, to deselect those properties from there. Always use save as to create new versions or copies of your specs and catalogs. Yeah, this is, you might get conflicts if you just create, or you will get conflicts if you just create a copy of a catalog or a spec. They will have this, the IDs will remain the same for the parts in the spec or in the catalog. So you might get conflicts in the future when updating from several catalogs, which are sharing the same IDs. Again, these IDs should be really unique, and GeoID means not just in your spec, not just in your environment, but kind of worldwide. GeoID is meant to be unique. So don't do the save as if you want to create a copy of a spec. It will create new IDs, and do a save as of your catalogs if you want to create a copy of your catalog, because it will create new IDs. Don't delete items from specs or models if possible. use the substitute grips to replace obsolete or incorrect parts with new parts. See next slide. So here, this is one workflow which was mentioned before. If there are parts you want to replace in the spec, don't just delete them, mark them as out of spec. So with the spec update, this information comes into the part. It makes it easy for you in the data manager to identify those parts and really go there and replace them. We have, of course, and this is coming here, we have, of course, this geometry update coming with the spec update. So with the spec update, as you see here on this slide, you will get the check now button. If you click the check now button, in the case there has been geometry updates, there will be two windows popping up. One is this spec update available, update pipe specs. This is for the properties, for the text. But you see below, we also get the geometry update panel. And this one, well, you can jump through all the parts. Well, no, actually not. You see 10 parts. You see in this first line 10 parts, right? So if you click on this line, it will show you one of these parts. But if you have 10 parts, then yeah, with this panel you cannot jump through all of them. But geometry update is critical, so things can change, and there might be some additional work to do if your valve is getting longer, for example. So you could consider, instead of using this and just clicking blindly and saying update all the parts, being optimistic that you will find possible problems later. Visually, you could also do it like this. You create new parts, and instead of modifying the old parts you will mark as by text, by the long description, for example, as out of spec. And then after the spec update, you can easily, with the help of Data Manager, you can list those parts by ordering here, for example, the long description family. Then when you click on this left side column, it will jump to all of the parts. You can work through all the parts individually, and then use the replace button to update them and see what happens, if it's okay or if you have to do additional work here. So how does the plant spec update check work? Plant spec notify variable is stored in a registry and can be set to 1 or 0. If it's set to 1, plant 3D will check for spec file updates by running this plant spec update check command when the drawing loads, and on the time interval specified by the plant spec notify time system variable. Okay, this is what you will, sorry, other side. This is what you can set here. Check for updates every hour or different. Ask me before applying updates. Check now. Plant spec notify time. This variable is also stored in a registry, can be set to integer between 0 and 4. The value indicates the time interval in hours that the spec files are checked for updates. So you know this pop up on the right bottom, if it's saying new updates are available, you double click then you get this window that I just showed, check for updates. So this first check will be always made when the drawing is loaded, regardless of the value, and default is 2. Plant update check. So this is what is the same as double clicking on this symbol on the right bottom icon bar. So this command will force immediate check for the changes to a pipe spec that's used in the plant 3D model that's currently being edited. That's open, the drawing that is open. Changes are discovered, you can update the model, or as I said before, you could also create a different workflow where you update the properties in that moment, but you close this geometry update panel because you want to step through all the parts individually by the use of the data manager. Okay, how does the plant spec update check work? Yeah, a list of specs, of course, it's internally collected that are referenced in the model. Are new specs, are spec files newer? Yes or no? If no, no update available. Do the model IDs match the spec IDs? So this is the critical point. Yes. The updated part is possible. No, and this is what happens if you delete during the project families from the spec and replace them with catalog families that you newly insert into the spec. In this case, no updates are available. It will show even there would be updates available. So this is what should not happen, and which you can avoid by not deleting families from the spec. So these are the project setting I was referring to several times already. So in your Plant 3D setup, you find the spec update settings. So here for each classes, you can define the properties that are checked and updated by the spec update. So if you, again, there are workflows that require, for example, if you want to override certain properties when you insert families from the catalog into the spec, there are, in this moment, you need to go here and disable these certain properties in order to give this workflow a real meaning and sense. Okay, so this is finally mostly it about this spec update. The 30 minutes already over. We will open this call now, but let me just give you one interesting, because I just had this case, one example how you could avoid, this is a very, very special example of how to avoid to delete families from the spec. So what we found, and this is not a very common example, that a customer had to edit the bolt set length table. So these are where you can set the default tables for the bolt lengths, and where you also can add additional tables that will be connected to this property, which is called compatible standard, bolt set standard, which is of course a different topic now, the bolt set. So there's a problem, and it doesn't just update. It updates when you, for example, delete a family from the spec, which you don't want. So in this case, if you don't want to lose connectivity of your bolt sets with the bolt sets in your active project, you don't want to delete the bolt set family from the spec, but you need to update the bolt length table. That's the situation. So what we found as a workaround here is that you can open the specs PSPC file using an SQLite database editor. You delete the table standard bolt lengths, and then you just add a dummy bolt set family in order to get the bolt tables imported again. So it will bring the standard bolt length table again, this dummy bolt set family, into your spec, and then you just delete this dummy bolt set family again, and then the standard bolt table, it will stay in your spec, and then you have, like this, updated the bolt length table in your spec. So this is finally it. Also, I want to refer here to Joel's from Joel Harris. He created actually most of the slides in this presentation of today. and it's based on his University 2015 class. Again, it didn't change much in the products, the principles. So here there will be, if you want to watch this in 1 hour and in better English than I have, then you can watch Joel Harris' University class of 2015, and also he wrote an article in the Pipes blog, which is linked here. Yes, so Nabil, are you still here?
Yeah, I'm still here, and I just wanted to add a resource. It's it's an online training from lynda.com, and it's basically an hour and 46 minutes on the AutoCAD Plant Really. It's essential training on specs and catalogs. So this is an additional resource for people who are mainly doing administration of the specs and the catalog. So I just posted the link into the questions panel, and you will see also another resource. It's a bit longer. It's 5 hours, a little bit more, 5 hours, 20 minutes of courses again. It's AutoCAD Plant 3D session training on the administration itself. So if you are not aware, if you have a LinkedIn account, you can get 1 month training courses free. So these 1 month are more than enough to watch these 2 classes. So I would strongly recommend these resources for people who want to learn more about catalogs and specs and administration in plant.
All right, thank you very much. So there are some questions in the questions panel. The first one was where we can download the slides, and this is.
I gave the link already.
All right.
And it's the December one.
I don't see it here. How did you share that?
Yeah, I shared it.
All right. Now I see that. Sorry, this panel has to be really maximized in order to see.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Go to webinar. It's tricky. I just it's about the webinar we did in December about working with the distributed teams. So that's the one Steven was asking for.
Oh, okay.
And then we have also another question from Marcos.
Yes.
And
Hi,
for
Marcos.
this question, I think we should unmute him because I need to understand a bit more his question.
Yeah.
So
sorry, I forgot that. Generally, I can unmute you.
Yeah.
Let me check.
I will see if I can
Audio.
unmute. Yeah, I just unmuted Marcos first.
Okay.
So Marcos, Marcos, can you try to speak?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello? Yeah.
Hi, Marcos.
Hi, Martin. How are you? Yeah, I'm fine. It's the question is about when the people lost the connection about internet or about with servers. In some cases, lost drawing data. You know.
But you're talking about, I see. You're talking about objects that got broken, or files that got broken. Yeah. They tried to improve it for 2021. I hope. When did you last? In what version did you last experience this?
19.
In 19, yeah. I see a good chance that this is improved. because in the, I don't know, the last call or one of the last calls, in preparation, I really tried to break parts, and it was, I couldn't make it, so I couldn't break parts, and I thought this is because we already have a improvement here in this property connection of this property keeping behavior of our 3D parts. So yeah, if you have problems, of course, support case is always the way to go. But as you know, broken parts, and this is not the topic of today, but has been the topic of one of the last calls. Broken parts cannot be recovered. Also, broken files cannot be recovered. The best you can do is you can open the file, but and then if you open the file, you can redraw it using the snaps of the existing parts. But those existing parts, they don't have intelligence anymore. All right. So
yeah. The question about this is I see you if we have the same problem with the docs with Ubin 360 docs. If
maybe not, because you are really working. So BIM 360 docs or the team solution that right now exists, they work like this. You have a copy of your project on the cloud, you have a copy offline, so you're working on your local computer. Working on a local computer on SQLite databases with one user should be very stable. So in most of the cases, the broken parts and the broken files, they come from network problems, or also SQL server problems, where the servers are down for a while, or the network is down for a while. So this is how it usually happens. We can all the customers that are coming with many these problems, they come 1 week later and say, okay, you were right, we had some incident, we didn't notice, but when we ask our IT, they confirmed there has been an incident. And yeah, so this would be better than this solution. But again, this is a collaboration solution. You use it for collaboration between offices, between geos. You don't just use it because you think it's more stable, because it also has, of course, a bit of waiting times when you check out, check in a drawing, and if you sum it up, you wouldn't use it just for this reason. So you have a good backup. That's the main thing always. If such things happen, then yeah, it shouldn't happen too often. Otherwise, your network seems to be not okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for the question. So there are more questions.
Thanks a lot, Marcos. I think we should unmute everyone, or maybe if people want to ask questions, they can raise their hand. Again, there is another functionality of the webinar to raise the hand.
Yeah. So I see Stephen raising his hand. Stephen, maybe you need to unmute yourself as well. We could have a look if there's a microphone somewhere where.
Yeah.
Because I cannot hear you. So Stephen did actually ask a question. What is the recommended way if you need to change the pipe spec, for example, ABC to XYZ?
Yeah. I'm talking here about the pipe run. So if you've arrived at 10 pipe runs and suddenly process has changed the specification of those pipe runs, saying these are now not carbon steel, but for instance stainless steel. What do you do? I mean, so changing the pipe spec during design happens quite often. And what is the best approach?
Yeah, I totally understand the question. Well, first of all, of course, you should avoid it, because changing the spec is usually not recommended. But in this case, it could work without problems if you first of all save a copy of your spec, and we just said it before, save it with the Save As button. Save As, and then you put it into this new spec you will then add to your project. So then you have two specs available, the old one and the new one, and then you select all the parts that are using this old spec naming, and then you change it in the property palettes. And really, just in this case, if the specs are identical, just a different name, then you can do it without danger. You select all the parts that have spec ABC, and then you change it to XYZ. Again, after you created a copy of the spec with Save As and added them into the project. So this should work, yes.
Okay, but let me rephrase it then, because probably I didn't formulate my question right. So imagine you have two pipe specs on a project, and yes, pipe spec 1 and pipe spec 2, and you routed everything with pipe spec 1, and now suddenly process has said, well, sorry, that was wrong. We should have routed it in pipe spec 2. Is there a reconstruct command or a replace command? And
no, the problem is that probably, so if you're saying, okay, it's just the string which is wrong, then you can do what I just said before. But if you say, okay, we're using the totally wrong parts, they look different, they have a different geometry, and we just want to, I mean, how should this work? You don't really know what parts to replace the existing parts with, right? There is maybe not always just one part available in the spec, but two. So how shall the system know which one to choose? So this cannot work, especially if there's no part available in the new spec at all that was available in the spec before of a certain kind. Then what shall the system do? In my experience,
correct,
apart from this logical problems, in my experience, Plan 3D doesn't work well with changing specs. It does try to do things, but it does sometimes damage your descriptions. You get a mess up between properties. That's what I've seen before when changing specs, which are really not the same. And so here I would be very careful. I would probably, yeah, will be a hard decision depending on how much routing did you already do. If the safest would be in this case, you redraw your lines. I mean, the routing is already there, so you can create polylines and do the line to pipe command, this time with the correct spec setting. And then, yeah, you need to replace, of course, the valves and all the stuff. So this changing the spec in the properties in your case that you just is risky. It's very risky. Well, try, see if it works, but I wouldn't do that. We have seen problems, and not expected problems, that not just the part is not found or the wrong part will be delivered, but also that properties from the one part is going into the other part, and very strange things. So not my recommendation to just change it in the properties palette in this case.
Okay, crystal clear. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question. So what is the best? So there's another question, this time from Vasurajan. It's what is the best way of duplicating the specs without getting the unique IDs changed? Copy paste spec file. What is the best way of duplicating the specs without getting the unique IDs changed? Yeah, copy paste specs. Okay, the question will be why you need this. So you want to send them, for example, to somebody. Yes, in this case, you copy paste the spec files. That's correct. In order, I mean, if you have one admin working on a spec, and then, but they're not working on the active specs because the active specs are on a different place, and you want to avoid updating them while being worked on them, then yes, you just you would replace them. Yes, you would replace them in the file system. So does this answer your question? But just in this special case, I mean, if you want to create a new spec based on one spec, then in each case, really important, you do a save as, because otherwise you will get conflicts of the IDs. So
yeah, Martin, I just unmuted Vasurajan.
Yes.
And because he has multiple questions. And just coming back to the questions from Stephen, where he was asking what's the best way to switch from one spec to another one on an ongoing project. Stephen, I will investigate a bit more in parallel if there are other tricks to do that. Even if it's not the common workflow, and that, I mean, it's really not recommended. I will find if there are some tricks to accelerate that for rebuilding purpose. So please, Vasurajan, feel free to speak if you want. Otherwise, we can follow your questions that you posted.
Hi Martin, hi Navin.
Hi.
I wanted to ask, like, I have a spec developed for a project, and one team is already working on it, and I need to use the same spec with some component added or some changes to be done. I just need to take the spec and do the changes and put it back, like completely replacing the existing one. I could do the change with the spec edit option, but for some reason I need to take the spec. I mean, just cut the spec from the project folder and do the changes and put it back.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that's correct. So the question here is, do you want to create a new spec, or do you really want to create a copy of the existing spec for backup, for example?
Copy of the
if you do a copy, then you do a file copy. That's correct. But if you want to create a new spec and you say, oh, it's so much the same like this other spec, but just some changes, and so I want to use a spec as a basis for my new spec. In this case, you make save as, because then you get new IDs, which is otherwise you will get conflicts with the IDs.
Okay, so that save as option regenerates the ID values, correct?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Thank you. That's the answer I expected.
All right, thank you for the question. So
yeah, and I think he had also a last question on BIM 360 team. He's asking, will BIM 360 team stop function with plant really soon?
no.
So
no, I don't know. No, I don't think so, because not just Plant 3D is on team, also Revit projects are still running on team, and those are architectural projects that usually take a long time, and so it will not stop soon. But I think it will be prevented from our side that you create new projects there, because we don't want, because Autodesk decided to stop team at when the time comes. So we don't want you to start new projects. Maybe not right now, but this will be coming once that you need to switch to docs. That's my personal anticipation, because it just doesn't make sense to keep it forever if you decided to use a new platform which is better supported. So Plant 3D in the 2021 version will just support docs, not team anymore. That's for sure. But it will stay for some years. That's also sure. So no customer will be. It will be a soft cut, not a hard cut. I don't expect that.
Yeah, fully agree. Just an addition to what you say, Martin. For Revit in particular, since Revit 2019, you need to move to docs. And the Revit 2018.3 works with teams and docs. And prior to Revit 2018.3, so 2018.2 and before, it works exclusively with the team and collaboration for Revit. So yeah, it's a bit different with Plant, as Martin mentioned. You have more flexibility, I think, with Plant at the moment.
Well, well, it's well defined. So in 18, 19, 20, you can use collaboration, but you need to use the team platform. The question is if you will still get it. I'm not sure. If you already have it, you can use it. If you don't have it, it's going to get hard to get it. But it's not recommended because there was lots of work being done in the beta, during the beta, to make it more stable docs, to make it faster and everything. So it will be the better solution on docs anyway. And apart from this, working on docs offers you lots of more possibilities as a project software to manage your project, and your plant files will be already there. So that's also a good thing. Okay, so we are already done. The hour is full, and thank you very much for joining, and thank you very much for the questions, and also Nabil, thank you very much for helping me on this. And
thanks to you.
And yeah, see you next time. Have a good time, and see you soon. Bye bye.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone. Thanks.